Good morning. Very pleased to be joined once again by Samantha Baldwin. This is now episode 4 of a series of interviews where Samantha takes us through her experiences attempting to protect her sons from abuse and dealing with the family courts and authorities who were protecting the abuser. So when we left the story last time, we were in summer 2017, and the courts had made findings, on the face of them, very bizarre, against Samantha Baldwin, and had decided that the forensic evidence that backed up the allegations made by her two sons was in fact down to her in some sort of strange conspiracy theory to frame her ex-husband. A very odd finding indeed. So Samantha, so picking up from that court finding, what was the effect of that finding? What happened next?
So yeah, the court findings were then publicised in the media. I think I talked about that in the last video, and because the judge wanted to invite the press in, he took the unusual and extraordinary steps of inviting the press into a family law just to report on his findings. It's just a shame that the public couldn't see how he reached his findings, because then they could see exactly what a sham family court really is, and how they just literally make things up to suit whatever agenda they wish to and ignore evidence. So it was just the feeling, having, you know, just having lost my sons to the state with a view to them being put back into the care of their abusive father, but then also being accused of his crime, being accused of someone else's crime. It was a sickening feeling. It still is. That sickening feeling never quite leaves, actually, to be accused of someone else's crime. I wake up with it every day. It's just horrible. But yeah, so obviously trying to battle that in court. So I think I talked about the first day that I was after, you know, the first court appearance after being separated from my sons. That it began then quite there would be frequent hearings, quite a lot that summer, and it was then in care proceedings, because as soon as the judge made those findings and removed my children from my custody, they were under a care order, so the local authority came in and got involved. So
this is social services once again. Now, you said initially when you reported the abuse, social services were quite supportive. They came in at this point. What was their attitude towards you and your children like at that time?
Very, very different, because because we were in different areas at that point. My first involvement with social services was when I first reported the abuse to the police when we were living in the Rochdale area, and social services were supportive at that point. But then we moved areas, so as soon as it became, so family court were involved, and then social services appeared just at the start of the fact finding. And
this is Nottinghamshire you're dealing with now?
Nottinghamshire County Council, or was it Nottingham? Yeah. So they were involved then, and then it took a very different involvement then. It was just basically, I mean, prior to the fact finding, they did say, whatever findings the judge makes, we have to treat that as the truth, and we go with that as being fact. So everybody was following the judge's false narrative at that point. So as soon as they come in and they're like, well, the abuse hasn't happened and you've drugged your children, you know, the conflict that causes within somebody who hasn't done any of those things is enormous. But it was like they were treating me like the criminal. Mm-hmm. Have you accepted these findings? No, of course I haven't accepted these findings, because I didn't do any of them. And then basically the social services, I was then in regular contact with them, having meetings with a social worker who was trying to tell me that none of this had happened and that I'd got the wrong idea and that I'd given the boys a false belief system, and do you admit that you've emotionally harmed your sons? None of this has happened. You put a sinister interpretation on what the boys were trying to tell you. You've got a wrongly held belief.
All right, okay. So the children are disclosing horrendous abuse, sexual abuse, Satanist ritual abuse, and drugging. They're naming repeatedly to the police, to care workers, to foster carers, their father as the perpetrator.
Yeah.
And one word from this judge, just one decision from this judge, everybody then starts behaving as though the manifest truth is that everything they're saying consistently when they're not with you is somehow you introduced a false belief system.
Yes, a false belief system.
This is bizarre. How it comes across once again as a bizarre conspiracy theory, because how would it even be possible to instill into two small children such a false belief system that they would wrongly accuse their father, and consistently do so with consistent detail to multiple state agencies?
Yeah, exactly. You've got, like, just to give you an example, I don't think I covered this, but one of my youngest son's disclosures that he made back in December 2014 was that Daddy held him underwater, fully clothed, and he said, "Daddy killed me." So he was 3 at the time, so he was trying to describe something that I have now heard several SRA survivors describing. It's called waterboarding, and they bring them near to death. They keep pushing them underwater, and then they just basically pull them out just before they get to that stage where they die. So my youngest son described that very clearly. He didn't. I think no. He told my sister, actually, but there was me and my mum and my brother-in-law were all present in the room at the same time, because it was, I think, Boxing Day, and the judge said that was clearly a dream. He said, "You put a sinister interpretation on it. That was clearly a bad dream." He said his father would not have done that. That's all they have to do, these judges.
Right. Okay. I mean, I'm trying to kind of process the information, because the degree of power where facts, once the judge has decided what the facts are, the actual facts don't matter. Exactly, they don't. There's something enormously sinister about that. There's something that a system is giving one person, one man in this case, a level of power to define reality, power over reality, not power to make judgments, not power to execute certain, a faculty of the state, but a power to shape reality. It just seems almost kind of impossible to comprehend. But we are aware that it happens more and more, and in actually more areas of law than the family court. Some of the free speech attacks are kind of along the same lines, where the court, the judge, a single judge, will decide what a person was thinking, feeling, what their motivation was, without any evidence. It's just that they decide, and on what basis, no one really knows on what basis.
Yeah, exactly. And especially that it's just the balance of probabilities as well, which you go into this thinking, well, at least they can protect, even if the criminal court can't get a charge or a conviction, at least they can protect because they've got a lower burden of proof. But they use it in completely the opposite way than it was probably. I mean, this is a very important point, because you're being treated like a criminal.
but you have no criminal conviction.
Exactly. No arrests, even nothing.
No arrest, no nothing. But
for those things, yeah.
Right, and if you or anyone else was prosecuted in a criminal court for any such for drugging children or anything like that, then the standard of proof would be beyond reasonable doubt.
Yeah. But
the standard of proof here is low. It's a balance of probability, and the balance of probability judged by one judge. It seems a tremendously shaky thing to be doing. And then, of course, if you go against the courts, you start getting into conflict with the police, where you do end up facing potential things like jail time. But it's still underpinned by the balance of probability.
Exactly. That's how as I said, with my mum and my brother-in-law, they've now got they've now got a criminal, what's it called? Criminal history.
Criminal record, yeah.
Criminal record, yeah. They've got criminal records now, thanks to a balance of probability judge putting them in that situation in the first place.
Yes.
So yeah, it does get involved.
Yeah.
But yeah, they distort reality. This hasn't happened. She's the danger. So you're really just up against it. When I was first brought into the witness box again after this had happened in care proceedings, they were trying to find out how much planning had gone, if any, into the alleged abduction of my children. And this was literally a few weeks after, and his barrister, my ex-husband's barrister, was saying, "This is all a joke to you, isn't it, Miss Baldwin? That's how cruel they are. It throws you off, and then you end up shouting and arguing, and then people look at you like, oh, she's unhinged." They just wind you up. It's all part of the process. But you've even got your own barristers, your own legal teams. When I did end up with a good barrister who fought, who did stand up to the judge, but she's also part of the system. It was almost like she was almost like, I don't know, she was playing their game, and she's a QC now, so she's done well.
Well, any lawyers, they're officers of the court. The first duties to the court.
Of course, it is, yeah.
And then they've got duties to the law society.
That's right. So she was saying. So it's been found.
So the client's quite a way down the list.
Yeah, it is. I've realised. Yeah. So she was even saying, yes. Yes, Miss Baldwin has a finding of fact that she drugged the children. I'm there wanting to shout and say, it wasn't me, it was him, and all. What it does to you, that in a turmoil, to be fighting against a room full of people who were just going along with this farce. It's just horrific. So I had that psychological assessment where I came out with no personality disorders, thank goodness. And not that I think I do have, but I know what a lot of these, I've heard about a lot of parents being wrongly labelled with paranoid personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, things like that. So mine came out fine, but delusional held belief, because she still believes that the children have been abused and drugged. She won't look at other alternatives. She's rigid. She has a rigid mindset, all that kind of thing. And then the children.
This is a case that reminds me of a situation in America, where, as an experiment into the nature of the psychiatric industry and psychiatric profession and the care they were given, they got 5 perfectly sane people from a university committed. And what they said to them is, look, we'll give you just false papers to get them committed, right?
Yeah.
So they were signed off as committed, but there was nothing wrong with them. And they instructed them, once they were in the psychiatric institutions, to behave perfectly normally. Just do whatever you would normally do. And they then left them in there for like a month or two, and then pulled them out. And what happened was, everything that these people did, and this wasn't under the sort of stress that you're under, But everything that these people did was interpreted in terms of the alleged psychosis. So one chap had, he always kept a diary, right? He kept a diary all his life, so he kept a diary, he did what he normally did. So this was described as compulsive note taking and diary keeping. So well, everything that was normal was viewed as being evidence of your insanity. And no, now one of the other strange things is all the inmates in the mental hospital knew that these people were fine. They said, well, there's nothing wrong with you, why are you in here? But all of the professionals didn't. They bought the line says, the word on the paper says, these people are suffering from XYZ, therefore they're suffering from XYZ. So the professionals never questioned the diagnosis. But the alleged insane people all knew what was going on. And they then pulled, when they pulled them out, there was a bit of an embarrassment over the fact that none of these people who were perfectly sane had been spotted by all these highly trained psychiatrists as being perfectly sane. It was a bit of a stink. And then later on, they said, well, we've run a second batch of this. We've put more people into these institutions. We want you, the authorities, to go and find out how many there are.
Oh, interesting.
And they came back and they said, we've found something like 64. How many did you put in? And they said, nobody.
Yeah, tells you a lot.
It does. I mean, there's a lot of people in the field that are doing excellent work, and sometimes you'll get a lot of support for people who are in the sort of trouble that you've gone through. Anne Gregg, for example, in the Holly Gregg case, when she was committed completely wrongfully, completely unlawfully. But when she got out, she went and got an independent assessment of her mental health, which was glowing. I mean, the report basically said, an absolute pleasure to talk with this lady. So you do find sometimes that you'll get the right sort of call, but it tends to be in a relationship where it's a private commission. If someone's appointed by the state, then they will always side with the state.
Absolutely.
So and this is one of the big problems with things like named person scheme in Scotland, which is a piece of unlawful legislation that was thrown out by the Supreme Court. It was all about gathering data on families and on children, but there was no checks on the data. So if one person put into the system something against a family, there was no means to test it. There was no means to challenge it. There was no means to correct error. It was just there. And that's a small example of what you're describing here on a much more severe level. It's there. It doesn't make any sense. It's not rational. It's not coherent. But every aspect of the state treats you as though this is fact and beyond contestation, which means every aspect of the state becomes your enemy, your opponent.
It does, yeah. Yeah, and unless you're very detached, switched on, and quite, well, that's the word, detached, then there'd be no way of playing that game. Straight after it's happened, you could only do it with hindsight, I think, or after some time, you just think, right, well, I have to clearly play this game or look at things differently. But, you know, they want you to have, like, just put yourself in for some counselling, you know, it'll look good for the court, to try and help to compartmentalise these feelings of, you know, that the children have been abused. It's just absolutely crazy. But so yeah, the children also were having psychological assessments. I'm not obviously going to name anybody who was involved, any professional who was involved, apart from the judge, because his name is out there, Judge Jeremy Lee. But everybody else, they're not. So I don't name any of them. But this particular psychologist, this child psychologist, it didn't take much research to see that in the 1970s, she was involved in this electrical shock therapy for gay people to make them straight.
All right, okay.
So that's quite interesting. So these are the professionals that you know, these experts, you know, with these crazy therapies and things. It's like something out of the dark ages, isn't it? Like electric ECT and lobotomies, and it's almost like an extension of that. But yeah, that was, you know, I know it's a long time ago, but it's still recent enough to be disturbing. So one good thing that came out of the boys' psychological assessment, even though it was all hideousness, it was all to do with that they'd got a false belief system, and, you know, I'm the bad guy and he's this, you know, he's this great father who's been wrongly accused, etc. Blah blah blah. But then she did say they should have contact with the mother, because at this point I was having contact with my boys, but it was on FaceTime calls, and they did start off weekly. And then social services made it fortnightly because I told the boys that people were praying for them.
Oh, that wasn't allowed?
They didn't want, because they just said it makes them think that there's something wrong with their situation that they're in. So I was.
That's actually quite weird. Every human being on the earth is worthy of a prayer.
Yeah. But they just, that was like a big black tick against me, and they punished us, me and the boys then, and made the contact fortnightly. So as I was speaking to the boys fortnightly on FaceTime calls, which just kept us going, it was something. But in that meantime, so the contact with the father had begun and was progressing quite rapidly.
So the boys at this point are still in foster care?
They're still in foster care, yeah. They stayed in foster care for a total of 8 months, from April to December 2017. And then at that point, they were transferred into his custody, because there's something that says if that parent hasn't got any findings made against them, they should go into the parent's care. So they were in foster care, and then after their assessment, their child psychologist recommended face-to-face contact between me and them. So that started at the beginning of October 2017. So as you can imagine, you know, I'm just thrilled to see them, you know, hugging them, and just, it was just, you know, thank goodness after all this time. They had regressed, but nevertheless, you know, I was still able to see them. It was under very controlled. Basically, I had to drive somewhere, meet the social worker in a car park, get into her car, drive to another local authority building somewhere else, and then they would then dropped off by a taxi firm. They were picked up from their location, dropped off. I had to be in the room already, and then there would be 2 social workers supervising, and then the boys would be brought in. And
so, I mean, a very heavy, oppressive level of supervision.
Yeah. So, yeah, they had regressed in terms of they were just a bit more hyper, and I could tell, you know, they'd taken a couple of years off their progress. Yeah. A bit erratic and hyper, you know, obviously with the trauma of what's happened. They were messing around with these. There was some. It was like the room that I was in was full of toys for younger children. You know, there were like dolls and stuff around, and they were messing around with these dolls and being silly and stuff. You know, and I could tell it was like the effects of trauma, because that kind of stuff wouldn't have made them so giddy and all the rest of it. But so yeah, and in the meantime, they're having unsupervised contact with their father. They started overnight stays. They've started, so he would pick them up from the foster carers and spend an afternoon with them, take them back, that kind of thing. So in the meantime, my youngest son had a series of 3 alleged accidents whilst in the care of his father, in these very short windows where he'd have them. Bearing in mind, he'd been to accident and emergency once in my care for 6 years. So we've got a space of a few weeks where he's in A&E 3 times, and he was age 6 at the time, 6.5. So the first time he'd got an injury on his mouth and teeth, a tooth had cut into his lip or something. He ended up in hospital. The second time, I'll say alleged, this is all I'm told basically. The second time, well, I had seen his finger, so I know the accident happened, but they told the circumstances, etc. But the second time, it was alleged that he'd trapped his door in the car door of his father's car, and he had to have an operation on his fingernail. He had to be put under general anaesthetic. I wasn't allowed there. Of course, his father was, even though he caused the accident. It's just, and then he had another accident whereby burns on his foot, alleged from a hot cup of tea, as he ran into the room on the coffee table. So,
well, that's a lot. In fact, I mean, I would say that any parent these days who turns up at A&E on a regular basis with a child is going to end up getting questions asked, and is going to come under suspicion as to whether they might be harming the child. And that applies to parents who have never had any allegations of anything made against them at any point, simply turning up in A&E with an injured child. It's now very, very common that the child will be taken away, and the medics will have a quiet word with the child on their own. What happened, right? Because the assumption tends to be that the parent's harming the child. Exactly. Now, given that background, 3 visits under these circumstances,
exactly,
it would have, I would have thought, have raised significant concerns.
Not with them, it didn't. I again was, as you can imagine, I was going mad on the phone to the social worker. But again, they turned it around on me and said, "I wonder why you are reacting like that. I'm a bit concerned about you, about your reaction." It was all turned around on me, because I was emotional and I couldn't be with my son to comfort him, etc. So all that was going on, and then just make sure I've not missed anything. So then my legal team wanted me to have another psychological assessment. So by this time, I'm more aware of what to say in a psychological assessment and how to deal with them, that kind of thing. Because I desperately wanted to see my sons, and I was trying to do everything I could within court. At this stage, I've met someone. I mean, I've met quite a few people actually with what's happened, going to meetings, that kind of thing. But I'd met somebody, and he was campaigning as well, because his daughter had been allegedly raped by a school teacher quite some years ago. She's now has been an adult for some years, but it was going back, I think it was about 10 years ago, and she was allegedly raped by a school teacher on a ski trip. And I don't know all the ins and outs of this, but anyway, so he was campaigning about this, and he was a distraught father, etc. And he was also looking at, because the areas, it was in the northwest of England still. He was in, was it Merseyside or Cheshire? No, Cheshire. So only half an hour away, 40 minutes away. So trying to connect the dots, because he thought his was a paedophile ring as well, the case with the daughter. Thought there was a paedophile ring there. And I knew this man had a criminal history, but I thought it was more in his youth, and he'd moved away from some of that, even though he'd had some recent stuff going on. It was as a result of this, with the police dealings, etc. And And anyway, so he was I met up with him a few times, and he was supposedly collating information to try and connect dots, etc. And, you know, came across, you know, supportive, helpful, patient, etc. And, you know, I'd tell him about, you know, various things with the boys, like my youngest son's accidents and that kind of thing. And he was wondering if it was done on purpose, you know, especially the one with the car door and the hand, you know, almost like a threat. So yeah, I'm seeing the boys once a fortnight, and this man had come into my life, so seeing him every so often. And then, so I'd seen the boys on the 20th of December 2017. That's the last time I saw them. And they just moved in with their father into their father's partner's house. He was seeing this woman, and he'd moved in with her, and which I was glad about, as you can imagine, and hoping that she's a nice person and she will be able to keep an eye on the boys, etc. She had a couple of teenage children, and so they'd moved in with her, and they just moved out from the foster. Actually, they were still with the foster carers when I last saw them, but they were about to move in with the father. And then they were away on a ski holiday during Christmas. I wasn't keen about them going, as you can imagine, because I said at best, with all those accidents, you know, this is a ski holiday, I'm worried about them, blah, blah, blah. But nevertheless, they were still, the court said they could go. And then contact was due to start up again in the new year in a different county, different part of the country entirely. And the social worker just wasn't getting back to me. You know, I was like, well, what's happened to the contact, blah, blah, blah. And then a month later, I find out, because they just stopped contact. They were fobbing me off, saying, we've not found anywhere for this contact to take place. All the contact centres are fully booked, blah, blah, blah. And then anyway, I find out the reason, because there's been an arson attack on the house that they had just moved into. That was on New Year's Eve 2017, while they were away on holiday. But at that stage, they thought it was something to do with me, so they just stopped all contact. Obviously, it wasn't anything to do with me. But later, so a few weeks went by, and this man disappeared off the face of the earth. And so in the meantime, I'm in the middle of putting together an appeal for the drugging finding. So that's what's going on legally. And it was around that time, so March, it was around the time of March, and I just thought I'd Google this man's name, because I've just literally just vanished off the face of the earth. And then I find out he's been charged for an arson attack at the school where his daughter used to go. So that was set fire to on a Saturday night in February, end of February. And he was charged and remanded on custody for that. And then a couple of months later, they'd charged him for the one in, as it transpired, Essex, which is where the house was. So it was just unbelievable. I just could not believe that this person who came across so well and had done such a thing. Well, obviously at that time, how he'd done.
Yeah, I mean, this is another thing that is sadly all too common. Again, referring back to the Robert Greene case, which I kind of lived through part of, you know, closely, you know, following each move. One of the problems that Robert had was initially he started this campaign, and a lot of people kind of essentially volunteered to help, and it transpired a lot of them weren't trustworthy, and some of them weren't who they pretended to be. And it hugely undermined what he was trying to do, and he was getting, you know, very questionable advice, and the people surrounding him were, some were the finest people you'd ever hope to meet, and some were really not. And when people are in a situation as desperate as yours, you have the offer of help and friendship and kindness and support, when there's not very much support flowing, it's very easy, I think, under those circumstances, under the stress of those circumstances, to be taken in by people.
Yeah, it really is. It's caused absolute catastrophe. It really is, yeah. And it's taught me just to trust very, very few people. I mean, I've literally, the moment someone, oh, we can help, I'm like, no, I don't think so. I don't think anyone can help, you know. I just think, well, other than me doing what I do with the campaigning and trying to shine a light on it, I don't want to encourage any kind of vigilantism or any people thinking they're doing good. But you just literally have to be so careful. People have their own agendas as well, and they think they could be doing something good when they're not. But this, it's just the craziest thing that somebody could have done. I mean, it was his partner had nothing to do with it as well. You know, that's her home, and her children's home. So yeah, that stopped our contact, because then they wanted to have a fact finding. So in the meantime, of course, my appeal gets refused for the drugging, because it's a family court. You know, at the time, I was just utterly convinced that we'd get this appeal, because there's been such a mistake that, no, it's none of its mistakes. The judges know very well what they're doing. And so I sought my own evidence from a forensic company, who then said that the judge's theory as to the timing of the administration of sedatives was completely off, and that it was much more likely that the boys had been drugged over a period of several months, you know, in accordance to 7 months for my youngest child and 5.5 months for my oldest, you know, show as far back as the hair would allow, kind of thing. So that was rejected. So it was just, shortly after that, I just thought, well, and then they wanted to make this finding of arson against me, colluding to commit arson.
Which would be a criminal matter.
Yeah, so I've never so much as been arrested for the arson, nothing. They tried to pin Olcott, you know, the police wanted to speak to me as a potential witness. This was early days. And I was about to, and then it was my solicitors that stopped me, a criminal one and a family law one. They said, don't, unless we're present. So obviously you take their advice, because I'm always like, no, I've got nothing to hide. I'll speak to them. Let's bring it on, you know. But and then it was only after, so this man, he was remanded in custody. Then he had a trial, a lengthy trial. It might have gone on for 3 weeks. That was beginning of 2019, so January, February. And then he was convicted, and he's now serving a 15-year prison sentence. So after his conviction, the Essex police wanted to speak to me because of the link to attend voluntary questioning. So my solicitor just said, do no comment, because they're just on a fishing expedition. Just do no comment. That is my legal advice. Because again, I was like, I want to answer all the questions. I've got nothing to hide. And then, so both my criminal solicitor and my family court QC at the time, he said, do no comment. I said, and I remember saying to him, but I've got nothing to hide. And he said, are you going to take my advice or what? He said, I think I know better than you. So of course I'm going to do no comment. So yeah, that happened. But in the meantime,
there is a film. In fact, I'll post it in the link. I'll post the link in the comments of this video. But there's a very good video where a lawyer and I think a legal lecturer as well, and a very experienced policeman, both American, describe exactly why you should say nothing to the police at any point. It's a wonderful video. It's very funny and very entertaining. But I think the legal advice is correct. No comment is the only safe thing to do. Unless you're
a paedophile or a Satanist, and then you can just say whatever you want because they're not going to come after you anyway. But yeah, so at that point, I'm thinking, well, so in the meantime, his text messages between us has been released, and that formed what they referred to as the evidence. So I had 3 QCs at that point, because I was having QCs at that point. As soon as the arson finding was, not arson finding, as soon as the arson was brought into the care proceedings, we were then given a higher level of barrister as part, we were funded that. So we had QCs. My regular ones were on a big case, so I had, they'd kind of given their kind of opinion, and then I'd had 2 different ones who'd came in fresh with fresh eyes. They all said the same. There's clearly nothing to link you to this arson whatsoever. So they all said the same. But at the back of my mind, I'm thinking, well, there was clearly no evidence to link me to the drugging. So I was, So then there was, so in the meantime, I'm having video exchange contact with the boys, so it's indirect. So I have pre-recorded videos, which I still have now. It's only 3 times a year, so I basically get to see my boys growing up on a screen, not able to interact with them. Growing up at a dramatic rate. My eldest one's probably taller than me now, and he's 13. And so it's just heartbreaking. And I have seen a deterioration in him since he found out the news that the court had banished me from contacts. You can see his hope has just gone. He was clinging onto some hope at that point. And so yeah, the fact finding for the arson was last March. So I had this female judge this time, and as soon as I saw her, I thought, oh no, when someone just looks evil, I thought, well, don't be judgmental. She might not be, because Judge Lee didn't really look evil when I first saw him. I thought, well, he did sometimes when he glared, but I thought, well, it might be all right. It gave the impression of being quite, calm and patient, but he turned out to be completely evil. But she turned out to be as evil as she looked, this woman. She just basically made up a finding against me that I must have known. And it was just, I'd even brought in this, or this witness had been brought in, and so just to go back, sorry to jump around a bit, but there's so much and I've forgotten to say, I actually hired a private detective, a man who's got this is in Cheshire, he's got his own company looking at miscarriages of justice. So I hired him for a few weeks. That was in the summer of 2017 after the findings. But then my ex-husband found out immediately, because this private detective had been to the neighbours at the time where my ex-husband was living in Rochdale. And they basically told him that there's been this private detective, and he'd also been to the office block where the abuse was alleged to take place to kind of go around there. And they did see some unusual activity. But so my ex-husband told his solicitor, and in court, so it was brought into court that I'd hired this man. And they just said, do you know, it constitutes harassment, which is on your injunction. So I had a very different concept of what harassment was. I thought harassment was, you know, going to harass somebody and not like get a private detective. So I was basically threatened with prison if I continued. So then I had to stop his services. So I'm telling you this because he comes in at a witness almost 2 years later, because they wanted to ask him, because they asked him to submit all the emails between us both. And one of the emails going back a couple of years was him saying that he recommends that he has a meeting with the foster carers. And at the time I thought, well, that's not going to be possible because their location was kept a secret from me. So they were trying to make findings that I had got him to try and locate the children's whereabouts, you know, almost like I was trying to get him to abduct them or something. And he actually came in as a witness, and it even proved on the emails that it was his idea, and he backed that up and said, no, it was my idea and it wasn't hers. The judge still made findings that it was my idea. So they just literally, it's just, even if you've got a witness that is outside and says, no, it was my idea, she didn't. So on the same strand, she's just, she's saying things like, I don't believe her. I don't believe that she didn't know it was harassment. Of course, she's an intelligent woman. Of course, how could she not know that it was harassment? You know, and I even said to her, honestly, I didn't know it was harassment.
Well, I mean, this is yeah. I mean, what does harassment mean? Again, going back to the Robert Greene case, he had a non-harassment order because he'd named 22 of the 23 abusers publicly, the 22 names that had been given to the police from the ring that was abusing Holly. And this was deemed to be harassing them, causing them fear and alarm. And he got a breach of peace conviction, and he got a non-harassment order. And he was subsequently arrested and held in remand for over 3 months for breaching this non-harassment order. And this was very strange because the Crown Office provided this huge dossier of 666 pages of evidence against Robert Greene for breaching this non-harassment order. An interesting number. His lawyer made a point of recording that there was 666 pages of evidence. And at the end of the day, it was all nonsense. And he was convicted of breaching the non-harassment order on the basis that writing to the constituency rep of Alex Salmond, the then First Minister of Scotland, about the case was deemed to be breaching the non-harassment order. So he didn't go near any of the people named in the order. He didn't publicise their names. He didn't do anything in public. He didn't campaign. He wasn't on the streets of Aberdeen handing out flyers or anything. There was nothing like that, although a lot of those things were in the 666 pages of nonsense. But nonetheless, it was deemed that writing to the constituency rep of the First Minister of Scotland, the person with ultimate political authority for the criminal justice system, was somehow harassing these people. So I don't think it's at all surprising that if that's going to be the interpretation of harassment, that people will fall foul of it. And it seems to be that harassment is being interpreted as, look, we are telling you what to think and what to do, and if you do not comply, that will be interpreted as harassment. It's a means of social control. It's not actually a means of protecting individuals. Because I mean, remember the harassment laws? They came from excuse me, usually men, sometimes women, stalking former partners or stalking people they wanted to be partners and destroying their lives. Right? And there was a number of cases which were terrible cases where people were stalked and harassed and threatened, and it went on and on and on and on. And sometimes they were eventually raped or killed, right?
Yeah.
And because nothing was done about the lower level stuff. So the Harassment, Prevention Against Harassment Act came in order to protect individuals from this sort of pattern of abuse before it got to the murder or rape level, which is fine. But of course, it's been used in a very different way now. It's been used as a means of social control. We don't like what you're doing. We don't like what you're saying. Stop. And if you don't stop entirely, we'll get you. And again, there's I know I keep going back to the Robert Greene case, but it's parallels that reinforce what you're saying here. His QC at the end of his trial, his second trial, for the breach of a non-harassment order, said, Robert can't talk about the Holly Gregg case. He said, if the two of you were in a locked room, entirely on your own, right, in an entirely private setting, he could talk about it, perhaps, but my legal advice would be even then not to do it. It's
absolutely crazy.
So they were essentially saying he has to stop totally and utterly. He can't discuss anything. He couldn't be overheard on a beach talking to someone if someone else passes by. So that the people he's not meant to be harassing could be half a world away.
Yeah,
it wouldn't matter. You could still be breaching that non-harassment order. The way it was interpreted was beyond reason. It certainly had a life that was not in the words of the actual order. If you read the order and you understand what the English words mean, you don't end up with the interpretation that the courts are then applying to.
You really don't know. It's worlds apart what harassment means in the dictionary and what it means in the court.
So you're the second finding, based on probability, based on one judge.
Yeah.
Was there any criminal action by the state at this point over any of this?
Nothing. So what I've been accused of, what the findings made against me in the family court, I have never so much as been arrested, apart from the arson with a question after the conviction because of the link. I have never so much as been questioned or arrested for any of the findings made, apart from the abduction, which was my own son's, for which, well, that's nonsense anyway. But for the other findings, yeah, the arson, the drugging, the emotional harm, nothing, absolutely nothing.
Okay.
And I asked Nottinghamshire Police to provide I asked for freedom of information about myself for the Nottinghamshire Police. I said, what have you got? Bearing in mind that when they were looking for us in the lodge, they turned our houses upside down, mine, Mum's, and then my sister and her partner's. They turned our houses upside down. They slashed the backs of sofas. They opened up picture frames, plants, all kinds of things, lofts. They even searched some of my friends' houses in the loft and that kind of thing. But so I asked Nottinghamshire Police, what investigations have you done into the drugging finding? Nothing. Bearing in mind that they sent out.
It's almost like they just don't believe it themselves.
Yeah, well, they don't, because I've talked to people in the, some of them have said it's terrible what's happened to you. Some of the police officers in Mansfield Police Station actually said that. They tend to be the custody staff. No, even the ones doing the investigation, one of them said to my sister, even as well, it's terrible what they've done to your family. So, and then others have said it's just this judge, we have to do what we're told. They're not all like that. Some of them are power hungry, horrible. We've come across them as well, the ones who came to give evidence against my mum and my brother-in-law when they were had the trial for perjury, for not telling the judge where we were. There were some police who were just, you could tell they were, you know, the job's worth, and they were just following whatever the judge said. So yeah, so then I had this false yet again another false finding made, and that was I found out about that last summer, and this judge even reduced the number of video exchanges that we get, because everyone else was trying to say one every 2 months. She said 3 a year. And she said, and I'm going to, she banned me from court basically for another 4 years. So I've got another just under 3 years of being banned from making any, I think it's called a Section 91. I'm not sure about that, or something like that, a Section 91 order, whereby you can't even make any applications for contacts without permission, without first seeking permission. Because they just said, you know, if she can accept the findings and look at things differently, she still has a really rigid mindset. Because at that stage, I was trying everything. I was even in touch with different police forces. I was trying to get them to the police force of where my sons were living over a year ago. I was trying to get them to test my boy's hair again. I was trying everything. I was in touch with the National Crime Agency. So the family court had sight of everything that I was doing, because everything, they get to find everything out basically. So I'm like, well, yeah, because I know he's a child abuser and he's drugged my children. And as I was saying that to him like that in this last court hearing, he smirked at me, my ex-husband. He smirked. Proper sinister.
From previous campaigns, on matters of injustice and failure by the state, what we found is that the responses become coordinated. That to prevent any possibility of you showing that one state agency is saying one thing and another state agency is saying something else, that all correspondence goes to a single human being within the state organisation. So it's all coordinated. So if you write to the police and there's maybe the medical profession, the NHS or something are involved, the information is circulated around before there's a response. So you're not, it's one giant joined up, in England it's called infusion doctrine. In Scotland it's called the Scottish model of government. There are no departmental boundaries as functional divisions. It's one organisation. It's one huge entity. So you can't readily interact with it because the information is shared everywhere.
Yeah.
It becomes very difficult. So the last time you saw your sons face to face was when?
December the 20th, 2017.
Okay. Now, they're obviously now getting, when your eldest son's getting tall, getting to age 13, it may be that the resolution from this does not come from the state, that the resolution, you know, despite everything they've been through, and it's a lot to ask of any young person, having suffered what your children have suffered, but the resolution may come from them.
Could do, yeah.
And I think perhaps in the next final episode of this interview, if we could maybe look at, you know, what you're doing in terms of campaigning and what you're looking to achieve through the campaigning, and have a discussion about some of the positives that are coming from that, coming from your refusal to surrender, refusal to give in to the lie, and refusal to abandon your children. And that's that determination, and if I may say, courage to maintain the fight, I think will inspire a lot of people, and I'd like to explore that in the final episode. But for the moment, Samantha, once again, thank you very much for talking to me today.
Thanks for having me on.